Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Welcome back to another episode of Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean, and this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Please check us out online at couplesynergy.com, and please subscribe to our podcast or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couple Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experiences working with thousands of couples for over 15 years.
Everyone says you need to work on a relationship, but nobody teaches us how. So we've created this podcast to teach people what they can do to create the relationship they've always dreamed of with the partner they fell in love with.
In this episode, Jean and I will be talking about the topic of compromise.
Sort of compromise, but also synergy, right?
Synergy. That's like that's a really awesome word.
His, hers, and
ours.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult for couples
Mm-hmm.
to conceptualize, and even more difficult for couples to create.
Yeah, if you imagine a couple standing at the altar, and behind the groom are his parents, his siblings. Behind them are his grandparents and cousins. Behind them are all his ancestors. And that's the tribe he grew up in, and that's what he knows. That's what he's learned about being in the world and about being in a relationship. And behind the bride is her parents and siblings and grandparents and cousins and all of the extended family that she learned her lessons from, and now they come together.
So you're talking about the merging of two different communities, right? Not just people,
belief
but
systems,
communities.
All of it, yeah. You know, and the way you grow up, you don't really have access to other people's homes. You don't really know what time they're eating dinner or if they're sitting at the table or sitting in front of the TV or how they're doing things. And so you only know what you know, and you think that's how everybody does it.
Yeah, I think that it's a very difficult thing
Mm-hmm.
for couples to do. Like, even if you grew up in the same town and maybe your families knew each other, right? So there's a lot of similarities. You went to the same school.
Mm-hmm.
But it is 10 times more difficult for couples to merge when they're coming from two different backgrounds.
I think it's even more difficult if the tribe, per se, that you come from is extremely influential over your life.
Like, how so?
If you're extremely strict in a religion, if you are strict in a culture, then I think that the individual is not as prominent or as important, the individual need, as the tribe. And then if another person from outside the tribe comes in through marriage, it's a little tricky.
So if there's a particular belief system
Mm-hmm.
that the entire tribe shares, but the person coming into the family is of a different belief system.
Right, like we were just in Macedonia.
Right.
And there, at least in the community that was the Albanian Muslim community.
We were in Macedonia to attend a Macedonian
Wedding.
Albanian Macedonian wedding.
Right. Muslim wedding. Arranged.
Right.
And, there, if you go out and you go to the coffee shops, there's only men.
Right.
And the women all sort of stay home. And so I'm there, and I don't have a home to stay at or a place to eat at, so I had to go to a coffee shop. And you're out of place there. You're out of context. And what's a normal thing for us to do here stood out very much there.
Right.
And so I think that would be a tricky thing. Like, that's what I mean by the culture. Like, how influential has the culture been?
So, if we use kind of our own wedding and our own relationship as
Mm-hmm.
an example, I'm half Filipino, half Persian. However, I was born here in the United States, and I was raised in a kind of white suburban community. I was raised in a white suburban community, and I also was raised Roman Catholic.
Right.
As well. So there was a lot of different influences on my life.
And then you had your cousins who were 100% Persian.
100% Persian. They were born in Iran and came over to the United States when the revolution happened. And their belief system was very different than mine. I mean, they even spoke the language. I did not.
Were they very integrated in American culture? Or did they kind of stay segregated?
I think they tried to, but first it was much more difficult for some rather than others. Specifically, the older cousins, it was a lot more difficult for them. But
So you fell in love with a white chick.
I, yes. But there was the influence from my cousins, the Persian side of the family, that I should marry someone Persian. Which for me was more foreign than marrying someone who was white Caucasian or who was born in the United States. That was much more
Aligned with your
aligned
culture.
with my belief system and who I was than marrying someone from Iran who maybe even spoke the language and I did not.
Right. And practice Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a lot of syllables.
So when we're talking about...
You didn't talk about what that means in terms of our wedding.
Oh, okay. So our wedding was kind of a merger of a lot, right? There was the Persian faction. There was the Filipino faction. And then there was, your side of the family, which was very white. It was, very white suburban. And I think that we did a pretty good job of representing everyone. We had a Filipino
We were
tradition.
certainly willing to be very inclusive.
Absolutely. We had a Filipino tradition, incorporated. We had Persian traditions incorporated. And then it was a Roman Catholic ceremony. But even though that we were willing to be inclusive, there were several of my cousins who were very opposed to it, opposed to the wedding. And one of them actually refused to go.
That was your closest cousin.
My closest cousin, who I had actually asked to be my best man, and he had turned me down. And it was kind of a wake-up call to me. I shouldn't say wake-up call. It was kind of a shock, I should say, and it really gave me this perspective I did not have, and that is that there is this opposing viewpoint and opposing perspectives.
Well, when we talk about the concept of right and wrong, it's really a tribal concept. It doesn't really exist in the real world. It's agreed upon terms. So in our tribe here in the United States, we drive on the right side of the road. But other tribes like England, they drive on the left side of the road.
And we came back from England just recently, and I got to say that's driving on that side of the road is wrong. It was very difficult.
So those concepts are sort of agreed upon. And even cultures like the Mayans, they thought it was actually an honor to sacrifice your children at the age of 13. So it isn't even as, morally justified as we would like to think. But even if you, didn't kill, didn't steal, didn't gossip, didn't talk bad about people, in terms of those right and wrongs that we are typically taught here, it's still when you get to your own personal life, you think there's still supposed to be right and wrongs, but there isn't a right and wrong when it comes to what career should you go into, or who should you marry, or how many children should you have, or what food should you eat, or what time you should go to bed. And so those type of personal decisions, more now than ever, have less tribal influence and a lot more options that I think are tricky for people.
I think it's also because the community within the United States has become a lot more diversified or minimized, I should say.
Yeah, I think that, when I was a kid, I went to a church, and in that church were all my friends and all my parents' friends, and we gathered often, and that was our community. But today, most people are in their homes by themselves with their kids, and they kind of interact through like my kid's on a baseball team or my kid's in gymnastics, but those change every year, and there's not like that unified solidity of community anymore, or the value, importance, or even the time for it.
Well, you think about just our own immediate family. You know, we have our son down in Texas, and then we have our other son and daughter-in-law in Washington, D.C. So we're spread out now across the United States. And, you know, our community is now just virtual, really, you know, for the most part. I mean, we
Right.
see them during, you know, holidays, and we try to visit them as much as possible. But, you know, the majority of our interactions are done, you know, virtually.
Right.
And so the community is kind of stretched.
So when you talk about two people coming together to form a relationship, and each one of them is bringing what they believe is right. So you imagine, you know, someone from England and someone from the United States coming together and trying to drive. And one's on one side of the car, and one's on the other side of the car, and one's on the other side lane, and other, you know what I mean? Is that difficult? And what you're used to feels so familiar that you are willing to really defend that. And I think that's where a lot of fighting breaks out, because you're trying to navigate that. And I think in the beginning of marriages, there's some really big things they have to figure out, like how to manage money,
Right.
how to,
The delineation of tasks
right.
within the home.
right, how to raise kids.
Right.
And so those really big ticket items, I think we're really passionate about them because we've learned those things before we were very conscious. Whatever were the traditions or the values in the homes we grew up in, it seems as though it's that way everywhere, and it's not.
Well, we first learn how to do those things from our primary caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in watching them and observing them, seeing how they interact. Like, for example, in, you know, during holidays, right? And there are traditions that are created by our primary caregivers.
What's the right day to celebrate Christmas?
I don't know.
Well, in your home, what was the right day?
The right day for us growing up was midnight mass on the 24th, and then Christmas Day, celebrating with opening gifts and having a party, you know, having family and friends come over.
So in my family, we always celebrate on Christmas Eve, because on Christmas Day we went to my grandparents' house.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got together, my family was still celebrating Christmas Eve, your family was celebrating Christmas, and then Alec.
Well, originally,
Yeah.
your family was celebrating Christmas Eve, and then we would double back to my parents for the midnight. It's not midnight mass, I think, at that time. We were doing just kind of like this midnight snacks and stuff, which is kind of a Filipino tradition. You go to midnight mass, you come home, and you would have like these sweets and you know, treats and stuff like that. So we were doubling back and doing that, and then we were then waking up and going for gifts at my parents', and then my parents were having like a party later on in the evening. So it was like we were running all over the place. And then Alec also, we were taking him. Where were we taking him?
Well, he would go down to Florida to visit his grandparents.
So we would get him on a plane.
Right. Yeah. And so there was a lot of times we were just driving
Right.
somewhere. And, you know, and so what is the right day to celebrate Christmas in our family with you and I and our kids?
Well, we had to create that.
Right.
You know, and you know, in the beginning, our immediate family was kind of lost in the shuffle of having to maintain all of these traditions of our extended family. And so over the years, we started celebrating on the 23rd.
Right.
And that's when we would have our, you know, opening of gifts within our immediate family. And now it's grown,
Right.
you know, to a really awesome tradition, you know, with now our adult kids, you know, and we still, you know, celebrate by going out to a nice fancy dinner or cooking a fancy dinner, dressing up.
And then we celebrate Festivus.
And then we've thrown in Festivus too. So I mean, there's a lot of different traditions
Air our
now.
grievances.
Right.
You know, but the point is that it's okay to create your own, because what you don't realize is someone created what you learned to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't become a priority in your primary relationship, and you stay in this tug of war of the way my family did it is the right way, or the way your family did it is the right way, then I think you end up losing what is the point of being married, which is that synergy of what's the best of one person's world, the best of the other person's world, and merging that together.
So I think people call that compromise, right? They use that word of compromise. I shouldn't say that they use that word to describe synergy. I
Right.
think they use the word compromise to mean I need to give in to my partner, or my partner needs to give in to me,
Right.
right?
And the bulldozing is probably, when someone really believes in their rightness, or that the way they know something, it's very comfortable, and so we defend that. We get very defensive around it. And then you see your partner hurting, so it's easy to give in. It's easy to be like, well, I guess this doesn't mean as much to me as it does to you. But then I think it erodes the relationship.
I think in the beginning of a relationship, it's most often people are going to give in, one or the other. But over time, that erodes the relationship, the giving in consistently. One person typically is the one that's going to give in. And that builds resentment over time.
I remember for us, we were dating, and we were going to get some beer. And
Yeah.
you liked different beer than I liked. And we were trying to decide what we should do. Do we get the one I like, and do we get the one you like? How do we do
You were
this?
into red beers at the time.
Yeah, Killian's.
And I think I liked
Heineken.
Australia. Oh, Heineken. Yeah, that's right.
And so I said, why should we choose? Why don't we both get what we want? And I think that's been a theme of our relationship is how can each of us support the other person so that the most of our needs are getting met at any given time?
Well, that was, that was really demonstrated when we got pizza,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so it was like, well, I like Canadian bacon and pineapple.
And I like shrimp, which I can't find anyone that even does shrimp anymore.
Yeah, you were like shrimp and ricotta and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yummy.
And so we would just do half and half, or
Yeah.
we would get our own pizzas,
Yeah.
right? And it's really it's really interesting when we tell people that, because a lot of times they say, you can do that? Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. And I think the goal in every relationship is to help each other's needs be met.
There's an exercise we used to do with people where we had them sit on the floor back to back and lock their arms. And then they had to figure out how to stand up, right? And they had to push really hard against each other's backs and straighten their legs in order to stand up. And it was a good representation of how if you allow that pressure to build, it actually lifts you to another level instead of giving in.
Well, you have to find a balance point,
Right.
right? And for some people, who are heavier or taller or stronger, maybe the other person has to push harder, or they have to push less. For each couple, two people doing that exercise, they have to find a unique balance point between the two of them.
Right. And I think there are certain things that become much more important to one person than the other. And in those things, if they give in, that's a really bad idea.
That's where they're compromising their own values
Right.
and compromising themselves. And that has no place in a healthy relationship.
I think the trickiest topic around that is socialization. How comfortable are you with how much time, if the couple is not spending very much time together and then they're going out with other people and the relationship isn't really being fed, but there's, girls' night out or guys' night out or whatever those things are that energy gets invested elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Those are tough ones. And I think people feel like that's an insecurity to say, I want to spend time with you.
Well, we use the example in explaining this. We use the example of, an energy account, like a bank account. And
Right.
where are you investing that energy and time? And if you are investing the majority of your energy and time into other people, friends, even family, extended family,
Right.
and not into your primary relationship, well, the primary relationship isn't going to grow.
Yeah, we see some, it's usually women, but sometimes men who are talking more to their mothers than their partner. And that is, their relationships are usually not in good shape because of that. You know, that's the same idea with when you have a child and things change over time. You know, when I was a kid, it was normal that if a woman was pregnant, she would drink, she would smoke, eat all the stuff we don't eat anymore, like raw fish and whatever. And, you know, we were raised on, you know, Wonder Bread and bologna. And today, you know, there's so much more education that new moms are wanting to puree their own baby food and be as natural as possible, or, you know, really watch what they're eating during pregnancy. And sometimes the grandparents are like, oh, that's silly, just give them a chocolate bar.
Well, I think this is where we see a lot of compromising happening in relationships where, you know, one person is just kind of giving in to the other person's wishes, especially when it comes to child rearing and child care, you know, which that is why we really encourage couples to stick with it, to communicate with each other. You may even have to fight about different topics to find that balance point. Finding that balance point is not an easy thing.
Right.
You know, it's like, you know, doing the exercise that you had talked about. It's like trying to, you know, push against each other's backs. You don't get it on the first time. You're going to fall down. Or running a 3-legged race. You know, it takes coordination. It takes practice and learning each other's strengths and each other's limitations. That only comes about when you attempt to find mutual understanding. You know, understanding about your partner and why things are important to them, and, you know, what you want to build together.
I hear this a lot, that someone comes in and they're so angry that their partner's not doing something a certain way. And then I ask them, well, did they agree to do it that way? Or is that just your way and you want them to do things the way you want them to do things? Right?
Right.
And I think people don't really stop and think about, where did I learn that? Why is that important to me? Why is that not important to my partner? And I'll tell you this, if the other person is behaving because you've told them the right way and you've told them that they're wrong, that is going to blow up.
That is definitely going to unravel at some point.
You know, it's kind of a funny joke that we use when a couple comes in and, you know, we ask, you know, is the right way to leave the toilet seat up or to leave the toilet seat down?
I was always taught to put it down for considering women.
But what if I wanted to consider you and put it up?
Well, that would be really nice.
Right. And we think, well, no, there's a right way. You should always put it down. But who knows? And that's the kind of thing. It's like, why don't you have those conversations about not only what's important to you, but why is that important to you? You know, I remember when we moved into this house, I wanted a room for me because there was an extra room.
Mm-hmm.
You had a room to do what you wanted with. And you kept saying, well, let's make that room the guest bedroom.
Right.
And, you know, I had always shared a room. I shared a room since the day I was born and my whole life. You know, I always had siblings in my room, and I always had kids in the space that I lived in, and I never really had a place. And as a child, my space I did have, often other people were in and they were taking my things, and there wasn't anything I could really count on that when I wasn't there, my stuff was safe, and I had a place that was all mine, that was kind of a sacred place that nobody else invaded and took over. And so that was a really important thing to me. And I think that's really just because I grew up with a lot of people that might not have been as important to you.
But see, it took understanding that in order to see that it is a legitimate need.
Right.
And in that way, when you find that out about your partner, then it makes it much easier to support that.
You know, another fun thing that we went through in the early stages of our relationship was changing the garbage can, right?
Oh, the garbage can example, yeah.
So, you know, we're together and I'm never changing the garbage, right? And one day you got mad at me. Like, why don't you ever change your garbage? And to me, it was never full. Because in our house growing up, what I learned in my tribe was, you know, when it was jam-packed, and this was a daily occurrence. It wasn't like it would sit for a week. There were, you know,
There were
11
a lot of
people in the house.
Yeah.
And so after dinner, it was jam full, you tie it as best as you can. There's still a gap at the top. Garbage is full, you take it out. How about in your family?
Well, we had like a fraction of the people that you did in your home. And so, when it got close to the top, that's when you took it out. And,
Or 3/4.
Well, it was so that you could close it and there isn't any space when you're tying it, so garbage doesn't fall out. And, so I got mad because I felt like you were just leaving that, for me to do. But it was only in having that discussion and finding that place of understanding that I went out and got a garbage can that closes.
You were, it was long before it was even full, and your family does that all the time.
Yeah.
And, it's important to not take things personally. And when you have a feeling like you did about the garbage, like have a conversation about that, because I had no intention or even an idea that was a thing.
Right.
The garbage just didn't look full. It wasn't like you're the guy or you should take it out or that's something I don't want to do or I'm leaving it for you or anything personal.
Well, we had a client where, he liked to go out. He liked to experience new things and to travel and to socialize. And she did not. She was more of a homebody and didn't like to be around crowds. And he would just sit there and fume and get really angry because the only times that they would go out together were the times that he initiated it. And he started to have this internal resentment that, she doesn't care about my needs and she would be content to just stay at home. And if I didn't do anything, we would never do anything but sit at home and watch Netflix. And so, encouraging him to have a conversation with her, he finally brought up that topic and they had a really productive conversation, and she was able to explain, that going out with people or being in a social situation, it drains her of a lot of energy. And so he was able to understand where she was coming from. And they were able to find, not necessarily a solution to it, but if you understand your partner's point of view, then you can have some compassion for why they want what they want or why they do what they do. And it's a lot easier then to find a way to meet each other's needs from that place.
Carl Jung would talk about that, right? About that we actually seek out, probably very subconsciously, something that we want but don't have. We seek that out in another person.
We actually project that onto people.
His movie on YouTube called Matter of Heart, he does a way better job of explaining it. But we do these projections, and then ultimately our partner can't give us what we don't have. And then we feel very resentful towards them and let down. But that's a really normal part about being in relationships.
Right.
And the ultimate goal is for you to, if you see that your partner is letting you down in a certain way or you think they are, you really want to look at what are you not doing for yourself? And so you do see that where one person is maybe more social and the other one's more shy. And the shy person actually would like to be more social, but instead of them challenging themselves and becoming that, they think, I'm just going to attach to this other person and they're going to do it for me. And that never works.
I think that kind of circles back to kind of how we started this podcast and talking about his way, her way, and our way, right?
Right.
And I think that people get into this trap when they just kind of do this all or nothing thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if it's not going to be my way, then it should be your way, right? But they don't really do the effort, take the time to create the our way, to really dig deep, to talk about things. I remember when we first started our business and I had a different perspective on how things should be.
What?
And you had a different perspective on how things should be. And I remember the weekend we kind of locked ourselves in a room and just duked it out until we figured out the our way.
That was a really important time because I know we were both committed to it being the best. And we had different ideas about what that was, but I also knew finding that center point in the middle was going to be that thing.
Right.
but it's hard when you can't see the other person's perspective. And, in our couples episode on Thursday with Ben and Kristen,
Mm-hmm.
they do a really good job. They came from very different backgrounds, and they had some tough,
Different religious backgrounds too.
yeah.
She was Roman Catholic, and
Mhm.
he was, I think, Baptist, I believe.
It was a very,
Or some type of-
a much stricter type of
Right.
lifestyle of religion. And, those are difficult things that, when you learn things as a child that you believe are bad or sinful, and then you go out in the world and other people are doing it, and there's that conflict within you, it's hard to resolve that. And we all have that. I mean, that might be a big example, like sin or something like that. But we have things that we learned, this is the right way and this is the wrong way. It's just not technically true. There is a way that we learned. Our first relationship is parent-child.
Right.
And when we get into an adult relationship, we show up as a parent or as a child.
It's very natural.
Mhm.
We should say that most couples do fall into that pattern of either being the parent at one point or being the child at one point, and that is because that's what we know.
Right.
That's what was taught and patterned, role modeled to us. And so we can't not fall into that
Right.
pattern. But the challenge for couples is to recognize that pattern and to grow beyond it.
Right. Which is, what we teach in our workshops is how do you know more than what you know? You can't. You can only know what you know. And unless you learn something new and explore, especially with your partner's your greatest teacher. They're the person who's going to hurt you the most as well.
Right.
But they're also can teach you something. And so if you put that effort in of really sitting back and going, why is that important to me? Why is this the way I think it should be versus what can we create together? And if you don't do that work, that is the number one reason couples at 25 years or longer in relationships end up divorcing is because they lack a common vision.
It's actually a guarantee that your partner is going to hurt you.
Absolutely.
And that is why couples shy away from really buckling down and figuring out the us.
It's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable and it hurts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talking about these difficult topics and trying to find that middle ground, you're inevitably going to be hurt by your partner because one person's going to get defensive or take things personally, and things are going to be said where you're going to be hurt. And that's where couples shrink back from that. They stop doing it because, who wants to be hurt?
Or hurt someone else that you love.
Right. It's like, venturing into a fire,
Right.
but that's necessary in order to get to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And, we make it sound like you just have to do it once, but that's not true at all. I mean, you have to do this over and over and over again when new topics come up or when new points are met where you have to figure out a balance.
Yeah, we've never gotten to the point where we're done.
God, I can't wait until that point, right? Well, then
And-
you're dead, I think. That's when it
And,
happens.
we just had our 22nd anniversary of being engaged
Mm-hmm.
on September 9th.
Right.
Yeah, 22 years.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
And it gets easier, but in certain areas it doesn't.
I think it gets more familiar.
I think, yeah, you're right. It
know?
gets familiar as far as the pattern of
Mhm. Right.
how we resolve, right? And then you're able to actually recognize also the places where we get hung up.
And the pattern, you're going to potentially take things to the brink and then you move through that. People don't break up because they're in the middle of a fight. They break up when they're calm. That's the harder thing when they've emotionally detached. But if you're in it, it can look ugly, but that's part of the process. It is not an indication that you're done. And so I think when it gets that painful, when we're in the middle of that, there's always that thing in the back of your mind, like, oh, we've been here before, and then this is
Right.
going to happen, and this is going to happen, and we'll be not just good again, but we'll be even better.
And we've learned where we need to take a break, and it just happens now kind of more organically than before in the past. And we're, as you said, able to kind of recognize that this is a familiar pattern.
Yeah.
And, I think when couples, they get scared of that, that's when they kind of protect themselves. They put up the defenses and the walls, and they are reluctant to come from within those walls, right? And they just stay there.
A fun exercise you can do with your partner if you are kind of listening to this and thinking, I don't know if we've talked about certain things. Act like a reporter and go interview your partner. And don't take anything personally that they might say. And really ask them, like, why is that important to you? Where did you learn about that? What were things like in your home growing up? And you'll be able to see them from a very different perspective, and it'll help create a bridge that you guys can find a way back to each other.
We want to thank you again today for joining us and listening to Couple Synergy.
We hope that by listening to this episode, it's not only beneficial for your life, but also for your relationship.
For all of you listening, please subscribe to our podcast and please leave a review on iTunes. We would really appreciate that. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplesynergy.com. Believe me, we take every comment and topic suggestion seriously. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, the Couples Weekend Intensive, and our premier program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplesynergy.com.
And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life, synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.